So I like to talk about the four functions of Congress. The first, of course, is the one that I think people most often think about, and that's lawmaking. The Constitution in Article 1 makes Congress responsible for passing all laws. And so when we think about laws and we think about them at the federal level, that's the United States Congress that's primarily responsible for that. In addition to that, of course, there are 435 members of the United States House of Representatives, 100 members of the U.S. Senate, and all of them have constituents. They have people that they represent from their home states. Of course, senators represent everybody in their state, and members of Congress, members of the House of Representatives, represent individual congressional districts, and those districts nominally are supposed to be roughly equal. We can talk about sort of on average there's somewhere around 750,000 to 800,000 citizens that are represented by each member of the House of Representatives. The representation function is what people think of when they think about contacting their member of Congress. I have a concern about not receiving my Social Security check. I will reach out to my member of Congress and see if they can help me navigate that labyrinthine institution that is the Social Security Administration. So that's the representation piece. And when we think about members of Congress going back to their districts, they're engaging in representation. They're meeting with constituents, and they're trying to hear what their constituents have to say and to try to take some direction from them.
Members of Congress represent, nowadays, the people who vote for them. Again, I think there's a traditional view that, members of Congress represent, their constituents. This immediately raises the question of, well, who are their constituents? One of the ways that political scientists think about that is through a series of concentric circles. So as a general matter, we start with a geographic constituency, which is, the state in the case of senators. It's a district in the case of members of the House of Representatives. Usually these are pretty diverse places. And usually, always nowadays, and for most of American history, the representative of that state or that district has been a member of a political party. And so the next step that I would emphasize is that while it's formally the case that the representative represents the geographic unit, either the district or the state, the representative also, or the senator, has a tendency to either implicitly or explicitly think about other constituencies, such as a primary constituency or a constituency of supporters within the district who are the most intense, usually members of that political party. So that's one of the ways to kind of slice it down a bit further. Another way to slice it down a bit further has been to think about particular interests within a district, and those interests may or may not be weighted according to population. So say business interests or educational interests or a wide variety of other interests. So now they all derive from the people in the district, and that's a very, very important thing. But practically speaking, the representative needs to kind of figure out how that representative is going to focus and to do his or her job.
So in terms of lawmaking, members of Congress can get ideas about legislation from any number of different sources: their constituents, the president, interest groups, major events that happen in the world. And with the legislative process, the idea is that they take those ideas, the expressed need for some new policy or an expressed need for a new program, they take that and they draft a piece of legislation. Typically, we would talk about that as a bill. And they introduce that in their respective chamber. So if they're a senator, they introduce it in the Senate. If they're a member of the House of Representatives, they introduce it in the House. And once that's been introduced, the chamber has rules about which committees are going to process that legislation. So Congress divides its work into several different committees. And so the House and Senate have different committees, but within the chamber, each committee has substantive expertise on, different things. There's a judiciary committee in each chamber, for example. There's a committee that deals with health and education and labor in each in each chamber. And so the idea is that that piece of legislation that has been drafted will be referred to a committee where those members who have expertise will be able to examine that, expose it to some critical questions about whether or not this is something we need, how it would articulate within the existing framework of our laws and policies, and then determine whether or not this is something that the entire chamber, or really the entire Congress, should take action on.
The fundamental characteristics of the lawmaking process are actually spelled out in the Constitution pretty well. The House obviously has to pass a law, the Senate has to pass the same law, and then the president has to decide what to do with it. Those basic elements of the lawmaking process are in the Constitution. We learn those in civics classes, and it's a classic kind of story of order and sequence. Bill starts in the House, it goes to a committee, it's passed by the House, it goes to the Senate, signed by the president or vetoed, and it's pretty simple, right? We almost have this in our DNA because it's become part of who we are. You can look it up in a diagram and see here's how a bill becomes a law. That's not so much wrong as it is entirely incomplete in terms of how bills actually become laws.
In addition, I like to talk about two other functions of the U.S. Congress. The first one is oversight of the executive branch. So the framers of the Constitution were very concerned about what they would call kind of an imperial president, or a president that acted too much like a king. And so they were very clear that they wanted to have separate institutions of power, and that each institution should check the other. And so the way that Congress engages in checking the executive branch is to engage in congressional oversight of the president and of the executive branch. And they do that by holding oversight hearings. So each of the substantive committees in Congress is connected with one or more of the executive branch agencies. And so when Congress appropriates the funding for those agencies, they also retain the right to interrogate the heads of those agencies about how that money is being used. And if they don't like the answers, they reserve the right then to change what they're requiring of those agencies. So executive branch oversight is a third function of the U.S. Congress. And then the fourth one, and this isn't one that textbooks normally talk about, is what I would call legitimation of the American system of government. And what I mean by that is in order for governments to function, and certainly for representative governments to function, the people have to feel that their institutions are legitimate. And so by being connected with the people through direct election, by being connected through representational activities, Congress is the institution in our system that is set up to provide legitimacy to the entire system of government.